Now, working as I do in television in Australia, I'm very partial to great, moving, thought-provoking videos, particularly where horses are concerned, as we've already seen with the fabulous one from ROR. So in preparing for the role of moderator here this afternoon, one of the bits of research into one of our speakers that I most enjoyed was the work of our next speaker, Jock Hutchison, and the video that goes with it. Jock, the founder of Horseback UK. Of course, we know thoroughbreds are renowned for their uncanny ability at assisting people who've suffered traumas, whether it be post-traumatic stress disorder, which Jock obviously sees a lot of in the people that he does assist through Horseback UK. As a commando with the Royal Marines, Jock saw firsthand some of the difficulties faced by some soldiers returning from war into the general community. And he's combined that with his equestrian skills, and in the past 11 years assisted over 1,300 people gain confidence and also horse skills through that program using thoroughbreds often sourced from ROR. So a very inspirational speaker. Please make welcome to discuss equine assisted therapy from Scotland, Jock Hutchison.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. At least I think it's good afternoon. I'll just say good day to be on the safe side. I'm still in some other time zone. I'm very proud to be here. I'd like to thank Diana and Di for inviting me to be one of the speakers here amongst such prestigious company. I am going to talk a little bit about the thoroughbred's ability to impress me. The thoroughbred has a stigma attached to him. He is a horse which is bred to race, and as such, those who don't know the horse will argue that he's not suitable for any other task. I would remind everybody here that the horse is like the human. He is what he's taught to be. And racehorses, thoroughbreds, are amongst the most intelligent and amongst the most sensitive of horses that we work with. And we'd like you to bear that in mind. I want to talk a little bit about the work we do, not much. I want to focus on one horse in particular, the horse in the picture. He's called Peopleton Brook. He was given to me by ROR, and he taught me as much as anybody's ever taught me about horses and their ability to help other people. A little bit of my background. I was a military officer for 10 years. I was privileged to be a leader. I led some of the finest soldiers in the world. I was also for 5 years a helicopter pilot. And again, I was able to work with some extremely talented people. But the truth of it was, whatever job I did, I was only part of a team. Admittedly, I was a leader of the team, but I was taught right from day one that the leader's job is no more important than anybody else's job. Horsemanship is leadership. It's leadership in its purest form. And all throughout my life, I've sought out horses. It's the one constant in my life. I've loved horses since I was a little kid. The horse in the picture was a Bright Bay thoroughbred that I owned when I was serving in the Marines as a pilot. Her name was Narcotic, and maybe the name should have been a little bit of a warning, but again, she taught me a great deal, and she'd been through trauma herself. Horses. 12 years ago, my wife and I, we founded a charity called Horseback UK. It was founded because I was made aware as an ex-Marine, for every individual being killed in Afghanistan, 10 were returning home with what they call life-changing injuries, many of them amputees. We had horses, we had a farm, and I wanted to do something for these young men. And what we decided to do was to teach them horsemanship and to give them what we called mobility with dignity. There was a lot of double, or what we call bilateral amputees, guys with no legs. And the type of riding that we practice at Horseback UK is Western, so they were able to sit on a horse and they were able to get away from the rest of us and enjoy the great outdoors. A friend of mine, Colour Sergeant Baz Barrett, most decorated Royal Marine to come back from Afghanistan and one of the most severely injured, spent a week with me, and his daughters came to see him. And something I hadn't thought about at all, Baz had spent his entire recovery, 3.5 years, 57 operations, in a wheelchair. And for the first time in 3 years, his daughters looked up to him, and that made a huge difference to him. He was now in control of a situation as opposed to being a victim or a patient, and his daughters saw him as that, and that made a huge difference to him and the way that we thought about the charity. What we learned from working with people like Baz Barrett and others was the fact it wasn't the riding that really was the powerful element. The fact is that many people who become hurt, whether it's mentally or physically, become isolated due to their illness. The people that I served in the Marines, they have to leave that community. And when they leave it, even if you're 100% healthy, it's quite difficult to re-establish yourself in the civilian world. So if you're carrying an injury and you didn't expect to leave the job you loved, it can be particularly difficult. After clinical care, many of the people that we served didn't know what to do with the rest of their lives. And I would argue strongly that recovery is not just a clinical process, it's about helping somebody get back to a point so where they can contribute and participate in life. We as a society should not use the word disabled. It focuses on what people cannot do. And the truth of it is we're all disabled in some way. The older I get, the more disabled I get. And the more times I hit the earth, the more disabled I get. I work with people who would be described as disabled. And they can contribute enormously to our society, our world, and to other people. But they've got to be given a chance. I'd like to tell you a little story. The guy on the left is a guy called Jay Hare. He's a Royal Marine Commander. He was a corporal. He was in charge of 8 men. He did 3 tours of Afghanistan. He was blown up twice. We call him Lucky. The horse on the right is called Peopleton Brook, and he's the horse that I mentioned in the original picture. And Brook ran 93 times. He won, I think, 11 times, was placed as many as 15. He wasn't a superstar racehorse, but what he was a hard-working, talented sprinter. All he had to do in life was run as fast as he possibly could for about half a mile with a particularly small person on him. He was good at his job, but he was hurt, the horse that is, and when he left racing, there was concern from the owners about what he could do next, because he was a bit of a handful. My friend Jay, on the second time he was blown up, he had his right leg blown off, digits to his hand, his face degloved, his nose, his eyes, he lost his right eye. And again, he had to make a lengthy journey of recovery. He did not expect to have to look for another job. Like the horse, Jay, the Royal Marine, was kind of written off by the world, labeled disabled, thought that only he could do the one job, and that it would be difficult for him to find a future and a purpose. I would argue strongly that both the horse and the man and the rest of us need 2 things in life. We need purpose and we need community. If we have those 2 things, we shall find happiness. And those of us that have been lucky to be part of teams, if we find ourselves isolated, it can be particularly difficult. Brooke came to me 3 years ago, and I was very interested in the last talk because we had to help the horse transition from one way of thinking to another way of thinking. And much to my surprise, he took to it like a duck to water. We put him into the herd. He adapted fairly quickly to the idea that he could run with another 30 horses, and they did a lot of the work for me. He learned a little bit of respect for other horses. My lead horse is a guy called Nimitz, and he rebriefed the racehorse fairly quickly. He understood that he was not top of the pecking order, and he had to coy-toy a little bit. However, very quickly, it became apparent to me that the thoroughbred sensitivity made him particularly suitable for the kind of work that we do at horseback. Jay, similarly, learned very quickly that what he really wanted to do was to help people, because his journey took 3 years before he got back to a point where he could be fit. He had to leave the Marines, and he now works as head of operations for horseback. So both the horse and the man found purpose and community beyond their previous careers, and that purpose was helping others. The charity, I'm going to go back one actually because I've missed out a couple of things. One of the processes that we do, when we work with people who are coming, they spend 3 weeks with us. They spend a week at a time, is residential. And we teach leadership through horsemanship. We don't teach people to ride. There's plenty of places you can go and do that. It's not about that. It's about the reconnection. And this connection that we have with horses, and those of us who love horses have felt this since we first met our first horse, is something extraordinarily powerful. And there's now a great deal of medical evidence to back up what we've all known as horse lovers since we were knee-high to grasshoppers. There is medical evidence that there's part of your frontal cortex that becomes very active when you socialize, and that part of your brain becomes active when you're with horses. There is a lot of medical research, and equine therapy, equine-assisted learning is becoming, it's a booming industry in the UK, and I believe in the United States as well. This reconnection is particularly potent if somebody has gone through a mental illness. And our attitude in the UK has changed enormously towards mental health. As a Marine, I was part of a process which assessed mental health in the Royal Marines and the Royal Navy, because so many individuals were coming home from Afghanistan with post-traumatic stress. And really, at the beginning of the process, it wasn't sidelined, but it wasn't understood. We introduced something called TRIM, trauma recognition in the military. It helps us as a team recognize that somebody else is hurting. And by a change of culture and a change of language, we call it brave to admit that you need help. We help people engage with the process so they can treat and manage this particularly difficult condition. The horses are ideal for this, because the horse is by nature an anxious critter. And by teaching somebody to help take away the horse's angst, they learn about their own anxiety and how to manage it. It's a very powerful process, and a very emotive and emotional process for the individuals that come. One of the things I hope we do, we've extended what we do, the charity. We now help kids that are disengaged with the educational process, and this provides purpose for the Marines and the horses. And again, it's not something you learn or talk, it's something that you see and feel. And as such, you gain wisdom from it, not just knowledge. We work with racing welfare, which helps people that have been hurt in the racing industry. And much to my shock, they have enjoyed the process very much, because they have time to go back to the fundamental basic that drew them to the horse racing industry in the first place. They love horses. And by giving them time to become leaders in the type of work that we do, they get to re-engage with that process. So, the charity would and will use more thoroughbreds because of their adaptability, because of their sensitivity. They are perfect. You could not use a horse for the type of work we do that wasn't sensitive. You know, an old cob, but my first horse was called Donut, and quite honestly, you would need some sort of small explosive to get him to go from walk to trot. Good, safe horse, but absolutely no use for the kind of work that we do. We need a horse that you're going to be able to become a leader of and interact with. The thoroughbred is the ideal candidate. So to finish off, because we're nearly at coffee break time, and if, like me, you probably need one, I'm going to tell you a little story about my friend Nick Watt, and Brooke, and how they came together. Now, we have a saying in the Marines that we don't do can't. And when I met my friend Nick, he had broken his neck at age 19. He'd spent 2.5 years going through recovery. He was paraplegic from the neck down. And we have a saying in the UK, he'd given up the ghost. His father was a friend of mine. He asked me to go and see the fella. And I, having no idea what to do, invited him up to meet the horses. The relationship that he developed with Brooke is, I'm going to show you a little video in a minute, is very powerful. And it changed Nick's life completely. He, at the moment, is going through a series of operations to try to reconnect the two vertebrae that were broken during his accident. And, you know, if he's lucky, he'll get to a point where he can get some movement back in his upper body. But if you ask him how or why that's happened, how he's got the opportunity, he would say the engagement with the horse and becoming a leader again when everybody else treated him as disabled was a very big part of that process of him wanting to continue with life. So, to finish, I'm going to ask you to show a little video. Can we put the video on, folks? And I'll just talk you through it. The music to it is atrocious. And here you see me illustrating that Brooke is not just a trick pony. He's not going to go through an obstacle unless he wants to. And if you treat him wrong and don't use good leadership, then you're not going to be able to do it. When we first started working with Nick, I used an older horse because I had no idea what we were doing or if this was going to work. And this is one of our old horses, Ellie Mae. She's the sweetest person you'll ever meet. And we worked out how Nick was going to use voice commands to control the horse. And then we put him back with the racehorse. And to my amazement, the racehorse sensitivity meant that he latched on to Nick, and the two of them bonded. And as you can see from the video, Nick is controlling, essentially, the Ferrari off the horse world by voice control. And voice control only because he's got no real movement in his hands at all. They go through obstacle courses, and they do things that able-bodied people couldn't do with a horse. And this, for Nick, is the crux of it. The challenge was that Brooke was a racehorse. And most people, Nick, although he's been hurt, he still wants to take on challenges. We must change our attitude towards people that have been hurt the way that Nick has. So as you can see from the video, the bond was extremely strong. And to finish up, I'd like to leave you with a thought. We've talked a great deal today about what we can do for the racehorses. maybe we should think a little bit also about what thoroughbreds could do for us, because in my experience, they can change lives. Thank you very much for listening to me.
That was fabulous. Thank you very much for that, Jock. Plenty of inspirational words there, and obviously so much we can all learn from that. Yeah, the Ferrari of the horse world. I like that phrase. Now, unfortunately, we do have to keep moving. So if anyone is desperate for a coffee, maybe grab one. But we don't want to miss Erin Crady, because this is going to be a really interesting talk coming up shortly. So we do need to keep on time. As I mentioned, the IFHA coming in here just after 4. Or just before 4, it might be. You know, the US, as I've mentioned, of course, has been at the forefront of work to rehome racehorses for several decades now. We learned at the Aftercare conference in Kentucky about thoroughbreds having been the go-to horse in the US for many, many years, till warm bloods came along in the 1980s. And that is now turning around. A lot of organisations are using thoroughbreds in far greater numbers. So our next speaker, Erin Crady, is Executive Director of Thoroughbred Charities of America, or TCA, a not-for-profit organisation that provides financial grants to approved charities involved in the rehoming and retraining of thoroughbreds. In the past 28 years, over $22 million has been handed out. So to hear more about this great work, and this is a case study of American aftercare, and also, of course, after some horrible natural disasters in recent times, a look to natural disaster management. Please welcome Erin Crady.
Okay, we're going to start off today with a brief video about TCA to give you a little bit of an intro there. So please roll the video.
Thoroughbred Charities of America raises and distributes funding to approved nonprofits that help thoroughbreds and the people who care for them. Since its inception in 1990, TCA has granted more than $22 million to hundreds of organizations. Governed by a board of industry professionals, TCA believes strongly in good stewardship of donations.
Each year, our grants committee thoroughly reviews every application submitted to us and selects recipients that successfully meet our criteria.
TCA's annual grants are awarded to organizations that support thoroughbreds, backstretch employees, and farm workers. The organization supports indirect and direct aftercare initiatives because its board and founders believe in the importance of organizations that create a market for thoroughbreds and those that are rehabbing, retraining, and rehoming. An incredibly versatile breed, thoroughbreds excel in many different disciplines after their days on the racetrack are over. Some former runners have found a second career in equine-assisted therapy services. TCA proudly supports many organizations that utilize thoroughbreds to assist people with mental health and developmental needs. In addition to helping thoroughbreds, TCA is committed to assisting programs that offer health and social services to backstretch and farm employees.
Our industry's workforce is an integral part of what we do, and we must support them. TCA's grants assist many organizations that provide much-needed services.
In 2016, the Horses First Fund was created by Ellen J. Foxwoods and TCA to provide thoroughbreds and their caretakers with emergency aid in the event of natural disasters or other catastrophes.
Let's make this an emergency fund where we don't have to wait for something terrible and catastrophic to happen. Let's just have the money there, be proactive.
TCA's grants are only possible because of the support of generous donors.
TCA donors tell me all the time that they appreciate the peace of mind that they have when they donate to TCA. They can make one donation and they know that we'll use it responsibly.
TCA is one, helping many. Please support TCA today at tca.org.
Okay, I'm going to first talk about TCA in a bit more detail, then share the origin of the Horses First Fund, which is the fund that allows us to respond to natural disasters, and then talk about our experience in Puerto Rico with Hurricane Maria. And kind of finally, I'll share some of what we learned from that experience. So, founded in 1990, TCA, we are a charitable organization governed by a board of 17 industry professionals. Our mission is to provide a better life for thoroughbreds, both during and after their racing careers, by supporting qualified repurposing and retirement organizations, but also by helping the people who care for them. We work to fulfill this mission by raising and distributing money to approved charities across the United States. 100% of our funding is from charitable donations, and as such, we believe very strongly in being excellent stewards of the funding that is entrusted to us. All of the charities that we support with a grant are independent of TCA and of each other. They are all their own nonprofit entities, so each year we conduct an in-depth evaluation of charities' operations by employing a very stringent grant application and review process. As the video mentioned, an important distinction about TCA is that we are an organization that assists thoroughbreds, but we also help their caretakers. The caretakers, of course, being the people working on the backsides of racetracks and farms across the United States. In 2017, about 65% of our grants were awarded to thoroughbred aftercare organizations, while 35% of our grants went to charities providing health and human service functions to backstretch and farm workers. Those annual fundraising and granting activities I've described here are really the core functions of Thoroughbred Charities of America. However, in 2016, we branched down a new path that was really the start of something that we could have never imagined would be quite so impactful. So in 2016, in Mercer County, Kentucky, 43 horses were abandoned by their caretakers, most of them thoroughbreds. When this story came out, I sent an email to my TCA board of directors and suggested that perhaps we purchase a load of hay and have it delivered to the farm where the horses were being kept. Since this was July, our annual grants had already been distributed for the year, so we tapped into a very small discretionary fund that we had. Once the hay was delivered, I let my board know the delivery was complete. One of our newest board members, who you saw there on the video, a woman named Jamie Roth, who's the co-owner of racing stable L&J Foxwoods, really wanted to do more to help those 43 horses. She said to me, I talked it over with my family, and we want to start a fund with TCA to help thoroughbreds that are in need of emergency aid. We asked Jamie and her family to name the fund, and they selected the Horses First Fund. And I mention this here today because the origin of the Horses First Fund is important, as it has given TCA the ability to respond effectively to natural disaster. On September 7th, 2017, Hurricane Irma ravaged the Caribbean and inflicted major damage on the island of St. Thomas and St. Croix. Shortly after Irma hit, I received a call from a woman named Shelley Blodgett, the co-founder of an organization called Caribbean Thoroughbred Aftercare. They are a newer organization based in Puerto Rico, but they also work to retire thoroughbreds from the racetracks in St. Thomas and St. Croix. Shelley said that with the damage from Hurricane Irma, the island nations were really struggling to find hay, so she requested a grant from Thoroughbred Charities of America's Horses First Fund. They wanted to send hay to the islands of St. Thomas and St. Croix. In the time since the abandonment case in Kentucky, we had formed a Horses First Fund committee. So I reached out to our committee and asked if they wanted to approve this grant to a CTA. The committee agreed, and a CTA was able to book space on a container ship of nearly 500 bales of hay that arrived in St. Thomas later that week. Luckily, CTA's other co-founder, a woman named Kelly Stobie, who lives in Puerto Rico, had significant connections in the maritime shipping industry throughout the Caribbean. But little did we know that that was really just the start of our relationship with CTA. Because on September 20th, 2017, Hurricane Maria made landfall as a Category 5 hurricane on the island of Puerto Rico. The storm would later be characterized as the worst natural disaster to ever hit the island. Running water, electricity, most communications on the island were down. Even before the hurricane hit, Puerto Rico's infrastructure was not comparable to the infrastructure on the U.S. mainland, so Hurricane Maria really dealt the island a tough blow. The island, of course, was thrust into a serious humanitarian crisis. Many residents did not have access to food or water. There is also a significant racing and breeding industry in Puerto Rico with several breeding farms and one main racetrack. Camarero Racetrack is about 30 minutes outside of San Juan. Reports varied, but it's estimated that at the time the hurricane struck, about 1,000 thoroughbreds were at the racetrack. On September 21st, I received an email from Shelley at Caribbean Thoroughbred Aftercare, and with her permission, I'm going to read you some of it. I wanted to touch base with TCA and share that Camarero Racetrack was hit very hard. Here are some photos I found on the Puerto Rican Jockey School's Facebook page, which is located at the track. They have concrete barns but zinc roofs, which aren't hurricane-proof. I have not been able to speak with Kelly. I've read reports that the municipalities where the track and Kelly are hit were among the hardest hit. Here's some of those photos she sent. You can see there the barns are just decimated, roofs torn off. Horses still standing in some stalls without a roof. Shelley sent a similar email to many industry organizations and really worked to sound the alarm to rally assistance for these horses, these thoroughbreds in Puerto Rico. It might be kind of helpful for me to step back for a second and share a bit about how the United States responds to disasters. We have a federal government organization called FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and FEMA responds to natural disasters at the request of each state's governor. So when FEMA goes into a disaster area, they completely take over the location's transportation, communications, everything becomes dictated by FEMA. Depending on how you look at this, it could be good or not so good. When the FEMA response was activated by Puerto Rico, many higher-level, broader-based animal welfare organizations began to converse about the response to the hurricane. Some of these organizations included the Humane Society of the United States, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, American Veterinary Medical Association. They all worked directly with FEMA to assess the welfare situation in Puerto Rico. Concurrently, many thoroughbred industry, equine industry groups began meeting and worked to assess the situation, specifically at the racetrack. This core group became the working group focused on getting assistance to thoroughbreds at the track. It included the American Association of Equine Practitioners, Jockey Club, Brookledge's Horse America, TCA, CTA, and an organization called Ranch Aid, which I'll explain further in a moment. I can't emphasize enough that this was really a team effort. All of what I'm sharing here today was only possible because of this group of people. I'm, of course, a TCA representative, but this collective group was only focused on one goal, and that was to help the horses. So whenever I refer to we today, it's this group. In the days immediately after the storm, we learned from Shelley that the track was able to restore water for the horses, but most of the owners, the grooms, the trainers, they were unable to get to the track to care for their horses. Kelly and a few of the owners and grooms that were able to get to the track were able to visit all of the 36 barns at Camarero. Reports of the situation were pretty dire, though. No feed was available because production and transportation of hay on the island had been halted. With all of these reports, our group knew one thing, and that was that we had to get feed and supplies to the thoroughbreds at Camarero. In all of Shelley's outreach, she learned that FEMA had appointed an organization called Ranch Aid to handle all animal agriculture-related efforts in Puerto Rico. This contact would later prove invaluable to us because if we had any hopes of getting supplies into Puerto Rico, we would need Ranch Aid to work directly with FEMA to grant us the clearances we needed at the FEMA-controlled airport in San Juan. Our team reached deep within their networks, and we soon had tons and tons of donations of feed and veterinary supplies to send to Puerto Rico. Now we just had to get it there. The most obvious means would be to fly cargo into San Juan. However, since the most significant humanitarian crisis ever was unfolding in Puerto Rico, FEMA had commandeered most cargo planes in the U.S., and if there were any available planes, they were hundreds of thousands of dollars. The entire island, including the airport, was under FEMA jurisdiction, so most flights in were loaded with aid for people. So we looked into sending supplies by sea. We could load supplies in a shipping container in Jacksonville, Florida, but we soon learned that with the backlog of shipping containers at the port in San Juan, that wouldn't work. The supplies wouldn't get there with the timeliness we needed. We asked equine air transportation providers, and many of their planes just were unavailable. We almost had a plane from a large equine air shipper at one point, but then it had a mechanical issue and was out of commission for 2 weeks. We asked private aviation companies. We asked thoroughbred owners that owned their own jets, but we were striking out left and right. We had 22 tons of alfalfa cubes and $10,000 in veterinary supplies ready to go. We just had to get it there to Puerto Rico. Then on September 27th, Shelley from CTA sent another email to our team, and again, with her permission, I'm going to read you part of it. There are many horses in the vet clinic with colic. The vets are very overwhelmed with patients in the clinic and little supplies. Many meds have run out or are dangerously low. There is still no hay. Hay production in Puerto Rico isn't up and feed isn't available from the plants or the stores. Many horses are standing in muck and 90% of the barns don't have roofs. Things are bleak. We need immediate forage and hay and manpower to care for the horses. Then on September 28th, I received the email that we had all been hoping for. One of TCA's board members knew a shareholder in a company called Swift Air, and he could get us a plane. We staged the feed and vet supplies at the Miami, Florida airport the next day. There you see the feed and supplies in the warehouse. We finally had our plane, but we knew getting landing permissions for equine supplies at a FEMA-controlled airport was not going to be easy. We were given the green light for departure on September 30th. We were elated, that the flight was finally going to happen. Kelly prepped a crew of truck drivers in San Juan that were going to unload and load the supplies. But then we learned that there was an issue with the cargo in Miami, and our departure date was moved back a day. We were disappointed, but we were told we were now going to be going on October 1st, so we relayed that information to Kelly in Puerto Rico. She would repeat the same process the next day of prepping a crew to load and unload. Then, just before our scheduled loading time, we learned that FEMA pulled our slot. 3 words I will never forget. Because there was no ground handling crew available to offload the cargo from the plane to the freight forwarder in San Juan. We were given a new departure date. At this time, none of us were feeling too optimistic about the plane until it was actually airborne. But then, later that day, I was texted some of the most wonderful photos I've ever seen. The cargo was on the plane. This was a really good sign. On Monday, October 2nd, almost 2 weeks after Hurricane Maria, at 4:30 a.m., Swift Air Flight 401 departed from Miami, Florida, and landed in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I remember furiously hitting the refresh button on my flight tracker on my computer so I could know exactly when the wheels were up on that airplane. The plane landed at 7:30 in the morning. Kelly and her team were there at the freight forwarder to transfer the cargo. On that flight were 20 tons of alfalfa cubes, $10,000 in veterinary supplies, and 2 satellite telephones. This was the first of 3 planes that our team was able to send to San Juan with feed and supplies. Eventually, the feed mills came back online and hay production returned to Puerto Rico, so supplies became available there on the island. None of us had ever experienced a situation like this, and the thing about natural disaster management is there is not a playbook or instructions. I wish there were. There's really no way to know what to plan for when it comes to natural disasters because of the unpredictability of them. However, we did learn quite a bit from this experience in Puerto Rico, and I'll share with you some of the takeaways that I learned. Firstly, having an emergency fund to assist thoroughbreds in need is something that we are very fortunate to have because it allowed us to take an active role in this rescue. With the Horses First Fund, we've been able to bring assistance to thousands of thoroughbreds. The funds are there available in the Horses First Fund. There's no need to take the time to fundraise when disaster strikes. Something else that we took advantage of was technology. There are so many people contributing to this effort, and we learned to communicate effectively by copying everyone and anyone involved on any pertinent emails. We also had numerous group text messages going back all the time, back and forth all the time. Technology makes it really helpful to update a large group of people at once for maximum efficiency. Another thing I took away from this experience was that the group of people that came together for Puerto Rico was pretty special. There were many highs and lows. Everyone seemed to take it in stride. If one person got down or frustrated, there was always something there, someone else there with encouragement. So good partners are crucial. Another takeaway from our experience was that most people are willing to help in some capacity if they are asked. You never know where you're going to find the help you need or the plane you need if you don't ask. It's also important when dealing with natural disasters to have accessible decision makers at all times. Things change and develop so quickly. You need a team that can respond immediately. The third plane we actually secured was co-sponsored by several organizations, and we had about 30 minutes to decide whether or not we were going to take this plane, if we were going to book the flight, or they were going to give it to someone else. So it's definitely important to have people on your team that are accessible, can make significant decisions, and authorize spending. And finally, I think the biggest thing I learned in Puerto Rico was to have patience. There were so many setbacks and false starts, but we had to keep trying to help the horses. There were times when I was extremely frustrated, and in disaster situations, it's important to remember that everyone is stretched thin, everyone is working long hours. People may be suffering great losses of property, possessions, or even loved ones, particularly when a humanitarian crisis is involved. These are some of the supplies being offloaded there in Puerto Rico. Some happy grooms and trainers receiving donations of alfalfa cubes. And there we have some happy horses, happy thoroughbred. So that's all. Thank you to IFAR, the Jockey Club, Godolphin, everyone for letting me share this experience. It was something we will never forget. Hopefully there will never be another one, but we appreciate it. Thank you.
Fantastic work, and so much will have been learnt through exactly what you've just described. So, being aware of having to sometimes get past the humans and the help they're receiving to look after horses. I'm sure there's plenty that it'd be lovely to chat with you later on and find out more. So we can open the floor now for questions to everyone who's participated here today. Di, Diana, Erin. Martin Burns, unfortunately, from New Zealand has gone. Jock, Seiji Yoko from the JRA, Jin Joel from the KRA, and also from the stud farm here in Korea. So any questions you may have, we have microphones, roving microphones, and I think I can see, now there's the mic. Do we have any questions from the floor? As we still have about 10 minutes before the IFHA will arrive here to hear Lyndon. Gosh, everything's sunk in and everyone's ready to take it all away and or chat later.
Yes, and I contemplated that pulling that into my presentation, but there's too much bigger on the ground. Yes, we were involved. California was a little bit different than Puerto Rico in that there were so many resources available in California. The question was, were we involved in the wildfires in California at San Luis Rey Downs? And yes, we were. We were fortunate enough to actually have a board member, a man named Bing Bush, that lived very close to San Luis Rey Downs, and he was there very fast in the morning and was able to lend some assistance. We brought in a lot of supplies, not only for horses, but also for some of the grooms, because many of them lost everything. So we did provide some supplies for the grooms as well. But California was quite different than Puerto Rico in that, things were very, very accessible in California, whereas in Puerto Rico, it was a disaster area. Everything was shut down. On the horse side, there was no hay production, there was no grain production. In California, we went to a tack shop and cleaned it out. So it was quite a different experience. But yes, we were happy to be able to help in California as well.
Diana?
Can you explain a little bit more about the courses that you give for your returning military and for racing welfare and for the disadvantaged children in the communities around you? The length of them, the length of your courses?
Can everybody hear me? At the back, can you hear me? There's somebody still alive there. Good effort, mate. Well done. Yeah, I'll be very brief. We started with 1 week courses, and we found that the week really changed people. But the fact was that, you know, people kind of saw the light and then you send them back home. And what we've done is we've developed a 3-week program that's spread over 6 months. And what that does is it allows people, the people that come, to connect with not only the horses but each other. And then they provide mutual support. So that word reconnect is really at the heart of everything. The horses do their magic, but the idea is that people then want to participate in life again, and they mutually support each other.
Do they come back again?
Yeah, and the other thing that we do is that we ask people, I think that I mentioned purpose when I did my little talk, and I appreciate the prompt, but one of the things that we do is that we ask people to come back and become mentors. So if someone isn't going to be able to go into full-time employment, what we ask them to do is to come back and inspire somebody else, or other people, inspire them to see a future for themselves. And it really does work. You know, this goes back to this idea, the word disabled is inappropriate, I believe. And we should look to people that have been hurt and see what they can contribute to the world rather than look at what they can't do.
I also really, just to let you know, I've had the benefit of being up in Aberdeen and seeing the work that Jock and his team do, which is phenomenal. Another area that inspired me a lot was seeing how as you mentioned earlier on, how you've helped beneficiaries. Some of your beneficiaries are people who work with horses, who've worked in the industry, and that I think applies to all racing communities worldwide. Those people that have got tired and sore and perhaps need to fall in love with a horse again.
This was one of the things I was most nervous about doing since we started. I mean, you know, we were inviting people up that had worked with horses all their lives. And who the heck am I to start telling anybody how to work a horse? The truth is, I think that if you're in an industry which is as demanding as the racing industry is in the UK, maybe there's not time to sit back and really allow that, the thing that prompted you to join the industry in the first place, which is the basic love of horses. And I think that some people lose nerve through falls, some people become mentally ill, some people get very badly physically injured, and we host all these folk. And the courses are designed to reconnect, so they reconnect to this love of the horse. They feel that they're leaders again, and in doing so, can go back and take on life the way they'd like to again.
Thank you.
Question over here.
Thank you. Amanda Bond from the Hong Kong Jockey Club. Actually, my question is for Diana, so I'm going to have to pass the microphone back to you. Diana, you touched on the power of the media, and I think it's something that's really important, particularly when we have so many of the negative stories hitting the media. Have you got some words of wisdom that you can share with us with regards to the work that you've done around the use of the more positive messages that we can get across either through social media or other media?
Thank you, Amanda. When we first started this program, as Di talked about the forum in Newmarket in July 2016, we invited Jackie Brock-Doyle, who is head of communications for the Olympics in London 2012, to come and talk to the room, which included heads of the racing industry from, indeed, Australia, America, Japan, England, Ireland, France, and Dubai, to actually explain what level of communication there really could be. And it's something that, as the racing industry has developed, so of course this element is developing too, but it could definitely be raised a couple of bars. And the more we do, the more we put good stories out there, so those empty spaces get filled, instead of them being filled as a vacuum with bad negative stories, which really don't deserve the place that they get.
I was going to say, Di, I was not retraining of racehorses in the UK. We discussed this outside when we were doing an interview a little bit earlier on, as far as, again, getting that feel-good message across. The work you do with these particularly well-known racehorses, but also just showing thoroughbreds full stop when they go to the racetrack, when you have a big meeting, or, you know, at Royal Ascot, I remember being there and seeing the fabulous display of the ROR horses. I mean, that is something, I guess, worldwide that is great to encourage, to actually show how these horses can transform into just magnificent equestrian competitors.
Yes, it's all about being proactive rather than reactive. So really in the last 15 years, it's one message we've always tried to deliver: the success stories, showing the general public that these horses have a life after racing and they can do almost anything because they're so adaptable and versatile. And that really has always been the message at home. you know, show everybody and get horses out there doing things. And the more popular they become, more people want to take them on and rehome them.
Diana, I also have a question for you. In your introduction, you tossed it out there that, and basically laid on the table that the racing authorities ought introduce regulations for into this sector of our sport. Doesn't that pose problems for us, given that, yes, we have that first transfer phase from registered people, but once we get into people that the racing industry has no regulation over and they're not licensed anyway, isn't that a huge, difficult problem you're posing us to create regulations for people we don't regulate?
I fully understand, Jamie. I think in many conversations that we've had,
That might help, sorry. Jamie, I think I'm talking more about the fact that if there are elements already in place from you, such as traceability, accountability, therefore, so that second stage after the first step out of racing would kind of take care of itself. So that's an element that you could put in place. Likewise, if there was more known perhaps about the foal crops, about the numbers of horses, if that was regulated, so too those elements that lead on to the end of a horse's life, more could be done in that area. So it's not asking you to regulate the very end of a horse or the second and third phase out of, but just to make this part of the business of the racing industry.
We have a question down here. Mike's disappeared.
Thanks. The question's for Erin. Do the racing authorities in America also fund aftercare programs, or is it predominantly done by charities?
TCA is funded based on 100% charitable donations. Our largest annual fundraiser is a stallion season auction, stallion nominations auction that happens once a year. But we do receive funding from industry organizations. The Jockey Club, Godolphin is one of our largest donors. So we do receive funding from within the industry, but it is all voluntary charitable donations. There are other organizations that do receive some mandatory funding.
Thanks.
There was a question. I did see a hand raised over here. The mic. Whereabouts is the mic? This end. Thank you. Thanks, Joel.
Perhaps this question is maybe best addressed to Di. I just wondered, with the retraining of racehorses organisation that you have, does the owner of the racehorse always hand ownership of that horse to your organisation, or is it how does that work in terms of the legality of who owns that horse? I'm just in terms of if that horse goes on to do something successful with its secondary career, or thinking as a lawyer, if it were to injure somebody, who has the responsibility for that horse's ownership after the change has occurred?
Very much from the beginning of ROR, we've always said that actually at stage one it is the responsibility of the owner of that horse to pass on their horse responsibly. Most of the horses are sold or given away to equestrians or other people to take them forward into their second career. As you might be aware, we do have some centres at home that we support through the charity. So we have around 13 centres working for us at the moment, and some horses go to those centres either funded by their owners, or if they go there as vulnerable horses, in other words, that they need our support through the charity, then ROR picks up the cost of that.
I want to chuck a couple of pence in here. One of the things that I've seen is that owners love the horses. I mean, and the horse that I talked about there, I've kept the owners abreast of what went on, and I think they've taken as much pleasure in the fact that the horse is helping people as they did when it won. And maybe you should bear that in mind as well. You know, owners they want to know what their horses are doing, so that's maybe something to bear in mind.
Some more questions? I was going to ask one of Dr. Jinkap Kim from the Korean Racing Authority. As far as so the mic's got to get all the way around the other side, past the, oh, thanks, Diana. Talking about trying to get more broodmares into a breeding program, as obviously, as you mentioned, there are only 170 from the 1,600 who are used as broodmares currently. Is there room within, I don't know enough about all the demographics or the geography around Korea, is there room for those horses to be placed at studs? Is there an interest within the racing industry to perhaps get more involved in breeding and set up more stud farms, or would that be something that the KRA really has to fund?
I think there are some stud farms in Jiangsu and Jeju Island, and if we want the breeders wanted to use that horse, retired horse as broodmare, they can use it. But the problem is, even though they produce the horses, they couldn't sell it because owners prefer to import horses. That's the problem.
So it needs a whole industry, doesn't it, then to have, raising them as weanlings and yearlings and so forth, and having a way of actually selling them too. So I guess it is more complicated than just retiring the broodmares and having more broodmares.
Yeah, the total system was not complete yet. There is some kind of unperfected system. So producing horses and then selling horses is not well go on.
No. So, it's still part of the whole tricky equation, isn't it? But it's good that it's all being looked at. Any other questions from the floor? I see a gentleman at the back. I can't quite see.
Hi, I'm Konichi Kusano from Japan Racing Association. I just wanted to ask a question to maybe the panels here, that like what Mr. Yokoi has presented, in Japan, the government has kind of gave us some kind of connections to actually push forward these kind of retraining program support or retiring aftercare support. Is there in other jurisdictions that have government support in this kind of actions?
Thank you for your question. There are a number of jurisdictions that already do fund various programs. Obviously, the BHA do at home in Great Britain. And looking around, Hong Kong obviously have their own program, and equally Japan.
How about the support from the government?
From the government?
Yes.
These are from the racing, just from the racing authorities, not from government.
I understand. So are we Japan in a very unique stance, or do we have any other countries that have similar kind of frame working with the government about these kind of programs?
Not that we're aware of. You are unique.
Thank you so much.
I see we have some of the IFHA arriving here, so we'll just see any other questions from the floor we can direct to our speakers while they're here. There will be time afterwards as well, I'm sure, to try and catch up with a few of the speakers, but we might be in a position perhaps to keep going. Yes, fantastic. Well, as I said, it is a great pleasure to have the IFHA executive, or some members of the IFHA executive, with us here, having just finished the council meeting here. So great to have you at the IFAR conference in time to hear our important keynote speaker. So thank you for joining us. It's a great privilege to have Lyndon Barons here as the keynote speaker for the IFAR conference this afternoon. Chief Executive of the National Horse Racing Authority of South Africa, Lyndon's held many highly influential roles, such as CEO of the National Olympic Committee of South Africa, as well as having an extensive background in marketing and sponsorship. He's worked extensively to improve community health and encourage education and leadership throughout communities in need of assistance in South Africa. Lyndon will update us on the work of the South African Aftercare program and about improving awareness of the program. So would you please make welcome our keynote speaker for the second IFAR conference on the topic of Aftercare, Seizing the Opportunity, Lyndon Barons.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Diana and Di, for the invitation here. I'm privileged and honored to be here today. I don't know if you had a mother or an aunt like I had. I know you've had a very long day. So, and it's been very packed, and you're probably fast asleep by this time. Now, when she took us to church, she would say, okay, you must stay awake. And at the end of the sermon, I want to know exactly how many times the preacher said Jesus. So you better stay awake. And I would like to know at the end how many times I said aftercare. All right, just to kind of keep you on your toes. As I said, I'm very happy to be here. You know, often when you decide on a title, and once you've written it, and when you get to the end, you kind of think, I need to retitle this. So in this case, I wrote the title, and then at the end of it all, I kind of have a subtitle, Our Thoroughbreds Are Icons, because I realized that the industry is so passionate about horses. And people know the icons. Whenever I get to functions, people tend to talk, hey, do you remember that horse in 1995 that won with that jockey? And I'm quite, astounded at the level of detail and how passionate people are, about the horses. In South Africa, I heard about Variety Club, I heard about Chestnut, Horse Chestnut, and I heard about Colorado King, and you just hear people really revere, and they are legendary. And so I thought I will use this as the basis on which I will share some of my thoughts today. And I'll use the acronym ICONS and try and unpack it for you over the next few minutes. When I look at the industry and I look at aftercare, this is how my visual is. I kind of see aftercare sitting on the sideline. It's not part of the main pie. It's not part of the entire cake. The industry is incomplete, in my mind, unless we deal with aftercare properly. And that's really the summation of what I'm going to try to bring across to you today and what we are trying to do in South Africa, to say that this needs to be part of the pie. It cannot be on the side. It cannot be an afterthought, a maybe issue, a nice to have. It must be critical to the completeness of the industry. I mean, I don't have to remind you, you all know what the international landscape looks like. You've all been part of it. I'm probably preaching to the converted here today. It's all very clear what's happening in the world. Nothing is different in our domestic welfare landscape. We also have cases like this, and I had to deal with some of these cases where horses are just found wandering around with no proper care. And I say to myself, is it really true that an industry that's so passionate about the horses, that will breed them, that will race them, that will be excited when they win, that will be upset if they end last, and then when it gets to the end of the career, they just don't care? And it's not all. You said earlier, Jock, that owners love the horses. I would just like to insert the word some of the owners, right? And we need to try and see, how do we deal with this from how we structure the aftercare appropriately within our industry. This just gives you an idea of what's happening in South Africa. There's a lot of goodwill everywhere in the world. There's a lot of things happening. But my point is, how do we position this product properly so that we can resource it properly? Now, in South Africa, as the NHA, we've introduced regulation. We abide by the IFHA guidelines. We are looking very closely to how we can improve traceability. It's still an issue with us, sharpening our stud book, and therefore we can improve traceability. That's part of our Vision 2020, that welfare must be number one. We have a whole host of other initiatives in the country that deals with some of these issues. But it is all still ad hoc, right? It is not completing the pie as it is from our perspective. So, and is it perhaps that our capabilities over the years have been developed largely within the breeding industry, and then in the racing industry, and in the wagering industry? And we've not given enough attention to build our capabilities within the aftercare environment. And this is something that we need to focus on what kind of expertise do we need to help us to facilitate that process, that exit out of racing into the life thereafter. And it's important that we look at that, at our capabilities. Now, you're probably all aware with that acronym, right? It's a mouthful, IABRW. Right, we all know that that is the International Agreement on Breeding, Racing, and Wagering. And the thought that just occurred to me, you know, when you can't sleep and have a cup of coffee now and then late at night, and the thought occurred to me, isn't there a letter missing? There's a lot of letters already, but shouldn't there be another A at the end of that? IABRWA, another mouthful, right? And shouldn't that be the International Agreement on Breeding, Racing, Wagering, and Aftercare? And why am I saying this? Because I want this piece of the pie to be in the pie. Are you with me? I don't want it next to the pie. I want the slice of pizza to be where it belongs. And maybe that is where IFAR has made its entrance, to try and deal with that gap, so that we can look at the aftercare. We have a lot of emphasis before racing, during racing, but we have to carry it through to after racing. And so what we did in South Africa is we said, let's try and embed it within the way we think, in our vision. And so we rejigged our vision to make it something very simple, and that is to create an environment in which the sport of horse racing, the horses and the people can thrive. Right, so that we can, from the word go, try and build this into the way we operate, our modus operandi. And I just pause to say that the development of our people is as important in South Africa. We still have groomers that needs a lot of attention as well. So I don't want to underplay that. But it's important that we instill this right throughout the organization as we move forward. And for example, here are 3 of our strategic objectives, and I'm not going to go in too much detail, but you can see what's number 1 there. And number 1 is they're improving the welfare of thoroughbreds and appropriate welfare standards. And we say, unless we build this as the foundation of our business, we will be doing an injustice to the sport within the long term. And that is how it's a part of our journey to excellence and how we create our future. Because we need to make sure that this sport is sustainable. It's always under attack. We have issues around integrity when it comes to drug control as well. And similarly with the aftercare. If we do not deal with it appropriately right now, it will erode the product over the next couple of years. Never mind the moral and ethical values associated with that. So this is how South Africa looks in terms of all the organizations that we have active within the environment. And then we thought, well, how do we kind of use all the goodwill that is there and try and channel it into one powerful program going forward? So we had the first industry meeting to try and organize our thoughts going forward. And the idea was there that we'll consult with industry, then we as the National Horse Racing Authority will try and take that lead. Or let me rephrase it, we'll take the lead and move this forward so that it is part and parcel of our industry program going forward. Now, maybe a novel way to look at it, or to bring some innovation into it. If you look at the horse there, and you see all of us, we are all employed by the horse, isn't it? I mean, all of your salaries, most of you are being paid by the horse. Mine is being paid by the horse, right? Nearly all of us. But somehow, we don't all want to take collective care to make sure that this animal is well kept until the end. So maybe that's the kind of mindset change that we're trying to encourage. Yes, it is important. We do have goodwill, and many of our programs currently ride on goodwill. But is that the sustainable way forward? Is that the way that every country can survive? Not all of us have the goodwill and the means and the disposable income, to be able to build a very vibrant program like TCA or others. And maybe we must change our mindset and say that every cent adds up and counts, and there is space for goodwill, but let us take collective responsibility, because this is about a collective threat to the industry, a collective reputation. Horse people don't look after their horses. You see it written in newspapers. So, the downfall of one person will get generalized to all of us, in any case. So we might as well take a different view and say, how do we all participate in ensuring the aftercare of the thoroughbred? So to bring it all under one umbrella, one roof, this is what we're trying to do in South Africa. Bring all the programs under one roof and have the South African Thoroughbred Aftercare program with its own board, its own secretariat, but there's a home for various groupings within it. And the point I'm trying to drive home here on the left-hand side there, you'll see that little circle come. I just took it away so you can see it again. That's quite an important one. I'm saying that the aftercare must be part and parcel of the cost of doing business. If you are going to play in this sport, if you're going to partake in this sport, then you're going to have to go the whole hog. Okay, you're going to have to find a way. Every jockey must participate. Every person that earns of that horse must participate. It must be non-negotiable. That is what we must work towards so that it can be ingrained and part and parcel of the program. That, I think, is the opportunity. This is something visually that we have in mind. That when the thoroughbred exits, that he has a number of options available to himself. He can go to stud, he can be retrained for equestrian, therapeutic, educational, other careers, horse care and rehoming, and some might be euthanized because of various circumstances in there. And then what we envisage is that in each of those subsections, that we find a best practice partner to guide us. It doesn't have to be in South Africa, can be anywhere in the world to help us, so that we don't reinvent the wheel, and that we, therefore, in terms of protocols and standards, that we're at the highest level. And then we look at facilities in every region. We need to look at education of our communities. A lot of the abuse happens because communities will get hold of the horses somehow and then abuse them. Now, many of our communities are not educated properly, so there is a huge role that we have to play in educating our societies, outreach programs, resource manuals, etc., to be able to bring this program together. Here's just an example of dynamic welfare partnerships across the world that we are learning from, that we are studying, that we are reading, that we'd like to interact or have been interacting with to try and give us some guidelines going forward. The opportunity here for us is to try and optimize the aftercare outcomes. Because this one is doing something here, the next one does something there, and because it's not coordinated, we don't build enough skill, we're not sure that we're providing the right quality of aftercare. And the opportunity for us is to try and bring it all together, to harness it, so that we can optimize. The opportunity is there for us also to look at research, accreditation, information and communications and partnerships, and this is also where I believe IFA can play a huge role in coordinating these issues around the world and packaging it for all of us to learn from going forward. And that will help us to get a much better improved product and improved perception of what we are doing in the marketplace if we can harness our opportunities. And hopefully that we will work towards what is called a lifetime care charter to underpin our efforts going forward. Now, what I'm saying, what we'd like to achieve, we'd like to move the aftercare from the conscience of a few good people, like we've heard here, to the statutory contribution of everyone in the industry. We cannot constantly depend on the good hearts and the goodwill. In some countries, of course, you do have it as statutory, but I'm talking perhaps in the other areas. And broader in the industry, we need to say that we all need to take that collective action, because the lack of action means the lack of eroding of the brand of horse racing down the line. It's inevitable that it's happening. So one of the ways that we want to approach it is to have a novel way, and really the way that other sport, I've been involved in other sport, and the way we try and do it, we have a program, and then of course you have a naming rights sponsor. So as soon as you put your programs under one, you then have the ability to structure your marketing and your sponsorship program so much better with defined benefits to those who will market and sponsor the programs. You could do a naming rights sponsor, a gold sponsor, a silver sponsor. You could have specific programs being sponsored by various entities. And I repeat that there are so many people doing this already. It's good to bring them into the mainstream, especially in our country. People are spending money doing good work. but bring them in the mainstream of aftercare, the mainstream of the industry, and give it its rightful place going forward. So again, the last point I would like to make is that somehow we must also make sure that society benefits from this. In the breeding before, there's employment, etc. During racing, society benefits. Afterwards, you know, because we don't have a cohesive program, we cannot see the benefits in our society going forward. Now, the one idea that I like is where horses will help our people. Same point that you mentioned earlier, Jock. Instead of us talking about how we can help horses, horses can actually help our people. And I've been privileged to go to one or two of these programs where I see the effect of how children will derive huge benefit, you know, from interacting with the horse. And more, I think those kind of programs, this is just my personal pet idea, is that if we can make those more useful to society, society will respect it more, I would think, in the long term. And so the opportunity that we need to seize is to say, how do we take this slice and shove it into that hole in the cake, shove it into that pie, if it's not there at the moment. And we see that the horse is at the center of it all. And we need to make sure that we bring and give it its rightful place, not, as I said, an afterthought. So I repeat, in closing, that we have to find a way, especially in our country, where we move it from the conscience of a few good people to the statutory contribution of everyone in the industry. So my question, is this fair to do this, or is it our duty to care? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lyndon. Most informative, passionate, fabulous speech there, and thank you so much for taking the time to deliver it. Are there any questions of Lyndon at the moment? Because he, of course, is our final speaker for this afternoon. Not sure where those microphones have disappeared to, but any questions for Lyndon about some of the things that he's put forward there about what can be done and ways to encourage people in this important obviously, the important way forward within not just South Africa, but everywhere. Jock.
And I've got a question for you, and that is, I'm not off the industry, I'm somewhere else, and I just wondered how, because the amount of money that is generated through gambling and wagering is enormous, is there in South Africa an engagement with the big companies that control gambling? Is there an engagement with them? Do they take some responsibility for the horses?
Yeah, as much as the income is right, it's quite enormous. The expenses are also very enormous in running it. So first, let's balance that out. And in terms of the operators or the gambling board, so those will be the two entities in our country. The operators are very active, but again, we do some here, we do some there, and you don't necessarily see the overall effect of a program. And this is why I think that we should try and pull it all together and coordinate it together. In terms of interacting with government, so there are two entities that we kind of we are linked to. The one is the Department of Sport, because horse racing is a sport, but we are not linked in an administrative way at the moment. And the other one would be the Department of Trade and Industry, because of the gambling aspects, and we are talking to them to see how we can reorganize our funding, because currently we get our funding directly from the operators, those who will put the event on the day, all right? But it's probably a better idea, even for our independents, to receive our income from the gambling board, which will then be a percentage of wagering, which then might give us a bigger piece of the pie, and we are therefore able to assist more in the programs. But currently, because we are registering and licensing everybody, or nearly everyone, we should already have the power within our hands to exercise some form of levy to be able to kickstart the program. But you cannot do that if you don't have a viable program and you don't have the trust levels from all those that you're going to be levying. I hope that answers your question.
Very much so, thank you.
Some more questions for Lyndon? Oh, we have one next to you. Amanda, I think.
Hello.
No, not Amanda.
My question is, I previously worked for the Hong Kong jurisdiction where the piece of the pie is very much included in the cake, and the post-training is part of the racing once the horse is retired. I'm now working in the British jurisdiction where that piece of pie is missing. So what do you feel is your biggest challenge getting that pie to reunite?
From a board perspective, we have 100% support. So that's the first thing, that your board needs to back you. Our chairman is very active and has been very active within that environment. So that helps quite a lot, and the board has endorsed that program. The next would be to get your industry players to buy in, you know, because if you set up a program like this, it must have longevity and sustainability, and you're going to need to convince and convict, if needs be, everyone to go to that program. And we had one industry meeting with a small group of the industry, and it went very positively, and I think we need to continue to do that. So that will be the next phase, to make sure that you have that buy-in. You know, you have to have the heart and mind, you know, buy into your program, because then you can structure it and people can work together and get that teamwork. If your foundation is wrong, you know, it will crumble down the line. And I think that's what happened in the past. You know, people try and do little ad hoc things here.
Very much. Thank you.
Okay.
I think Di Arbuthnot would like to respond to Lyndon, I believe.
Actually, not really to Lyndon, just to actually tell the room, in fact, how the British horse racing does support ROR and welfare in general. And in fact, in those very early days, 15 years ago, that actually when ROR, or rehabilitation of racehorses, was started all those years ago, the industry and British horse racing immediately stepped in. And still now, every single owner, when an entry is made for their horse, gives us £1, and the race courses and the breeders and all other parts of the industry contribute to horse welfare and to retraining of racehorses. So we are well supported and were from the very beginning, and that is actually where we started in 2016, when this was first put on the table, that you do need support from your governing body. That is one of the most essential parts of this, working with the racing jurisdictions and getting this going and having some funds. And I think also was touched on earlier, we also have emergency funding available, which Erin said, for those sort of situations, thank goodness we've never had one as large as yours, but we do have funds available for horses that need emergency support. So that's one of the key things for any jurisdictions to get going with the welfare charities.
No other question. Lyndon, I was going to, sorry, interrupt you just for a sec. When you talk about, as you mentioned, a jock, we do see it in the racing industry. So many people have the love of the horse, but there are always those who don't. You know, they buy into shares in horses, or they don't really have a passion for it. Is there something you can see that can be done to really, I mean, there's so much work we've all discussed through the entire afternoon, but to really kind of tap into them, that you know, these animals are so important. We really need to have them actually caring for them as animals, not just through regulation or through whatever. Is it possible, do you think, to turn those people around and get them to really love the horse?
No, I don't know. I would love to venture some thoughts, but I don't think so. Hence, I'm saying let's try and make it statutory, because to get everybody to love the horse equally, it's not going to be, you know.
True.
Your horse performs and you want to kiss him and hug him and jump all over him, and he's lost, and you say, get rid of that horse, right? And then you don't care what happens to that horse at times. So therefore, let's take the emotion out of it, and let's put a practical program in place where everybody needs to perhaps like pay a fee when you enter the game.
Across
and that
the
will
board.
Guarantee. So even if you're upset with your darling at the end, you know, your darling will still be sorted out.
No, very good. Any other questions of either Lyndon or anyone else from the panel earlier? All right, I think we can pretty much wrap it up. I'll just do a bit of a summary for the members of the IFHA who've just arrived in here. Some of the speakers earlier in the day, Di Arbuthnot, we heard from ROR, saying playing a great video, the music I Can Change. It's obviously a message for a lot of jurisdictions wanting to make aftercare a priority. And every jurisdiction should take the steps to obviously develop infrastructure to assist the thoroughbreds when they retire from racing, and obviously IFAR, as you've just heard from Di, is certainly there to assist with that. From Godolphin, Diana Cooper, the pendulum shifts, as we've seen often with people, seeing some of the bad social media in particular about racing. Suddenly there's a social license that kind of dictates what needs to be done, and there's obviously a need to establish that aftercare's totally non-negotiable. Dr. Jinkap Kim from the Korean Racing Authority. Interesting hearing about some of the realistic solutions from the KRA regarding rehoming and the work that they're doing here. Dr. Cheol Jai Kwan also talking about the possible versus the impossible when you're talking about retraining of thoroughbreds in Korea. Some things are possible, some things are pretty difficult to achieve. Martin Burns, who unfortunately had to leave us from New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing, talking about partnerships, saying they can leverage the passion, the knowledge, the skills of others, obviously with the common goal being the welfare of the horse. And traceability and data capture obviously are incredibly important. Jock was fantastic, particularly the photos or the video there of Nick controlling the Ferrari, so a man in a wheelchair controlling this massive thoroughbred just with his voice. And as Jock said, we need to think, as Lyndon just quoted too, not just about what we can do for thoroughbreds, but what they can do for us with the fabulous work he's doing with Horseback UK for so many people needing that time with horses to really make life pleasurable for them again. Erin Crady, we just heard again from TCA, the charity in America, the amazing work done through natural disasters, and really the battle to get feed and care for horses is such a priority, and you're really battling, people trying to do well for humans, but the horses, obviously, there's a lot of support in the end to try and make sure horses are well cared for as well. Seiji Yoko from Japan's JRA, launching a retraining program to help with the transition from racing into being retrained as equestrian horses. Huge money being donated by the JRA, which obviously they're fortunately in a position to be able to do, but it's fantastic to see that money, grants to riding clubs, to riding competitions, etc., really trying to encourage the take-up of thoroughbreds. Jock, as I said, was fantastic. Lyndon cannot be an afterthought. It must be absolutely critical to the industry, the topic of aftercare, and brilliant comment that all our salaries, I'd say most of the people in the room come from horses. So, we need to make sure, and a lot of people don't, but they need to be encouraged to make sure that they look after the horse as well. So certainly I'd like to thank IFAR, thank so many people that have been involved in making today's conference possible. The IFAR committee for inviting us to their second forum. Thank you, of course, Di Arbuthnot, Diana Cooper, for their fabulous speeches today as well. Also Elliot Forbes, Jim Gagliano, it's great to see you just joining us, Jamie Steer, Fiona Carlin, Andrew Chesser, also who's been next door but has dipped in and out and seen bits of it, and also Trish Bowman for your help too. Also the other marvellous speakers here today, I've just mentioned most of them, I think they're Dr. Jinkap Kim, Cheol Jai Kwan, Martin Burns, Seiji Yoko, Jock Hutchison, Erin Crady and Lyndon Barris. Please make, say a huge thank you to everybody who's contributed here this afternoon. Thanks, Jock. And also thanks to our audience, all of you who've taken the time out to hear more about this absolutely vital part of thoroughbred racing and breeding industry. And don't miss, make sure you don't miss Thursday morning's equine welfare session from 9 to 11 a.m. You'll hear from the Chair of Racing Australia, Francis Nelson QC, President of the US Jockey Club, Jim Gagliano, who I just mentioned, Dr. Sam Franklin from the University of Adelaide, Dr. Peter Curl, Amanda Bond from the Hong Kong Jockey Club, and Dr. Kyung Won Park from the Korean Racing Authority. Thank you all very much again. I'm sure you've taken away many, many great ideas and some practical information about how best to look after our thoroughbreds in all jurisdictions. So thank you once more and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.